Welcome to Stranger Encounters. I'm Tommy Salmons. Today my guest is a freelancer, an entrepreneur, and a world traveler. Rebecca Zeines. Zeines, I got it right. I'm going to get it. Rebecca Zeines. Hey, Rebecca.
Hi.
How are you doing today?
Pretty good. It's a Saturday morning that I'm actually giving myself off from work, so it feels nice.
Yeah. Well, we all got to do what we got to do. Some of us are just more chained down than others.
Yeah, well, that's the benefit of freelancing in a sense. It gives me the space to kind of set my own schedule as long as I respect the deadlines that any of my clients have for me.
Mm-hmm.
I can take time off whenever I want.
Yeah. Yeah. How has that gone for you? Did you have trouble in the beginning with freelancing? Was it something that you got? Did you have any problems finding the right sites to deal with and the right customers to deal with, or did it come pretty easily?
So my freelancing journey is a little bit atypical because I didn't plan on becoming an editor. I didn't put a lot of intention towards that starting out. I actually thought that I would end up working in an alternative school somewhere, because that's what I had been doing prior to moving to Atlanta, where my freelance career kind of took off. The websites that I used, I tried Upwork and I found a client, and it didn't really work out for me because her needs and expectations didn't match up with what I was willing to offer her.
Mm-hmm.
And what we had initially agreed upon. And the Upwork format just doesn't really do it for me because I'm not very competitive by nature, and that highlights too much the fact that I'm competing against other people for the job.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have enough experience to feel like the work that I would get paid for was worthy in a sense. So my freelance stuff just kind of randomly picked up from friends needing editorial services, because I realized by then that I like doing that, and me saying, yeah, I'm here. Give me work, please. And so I don't actually use job websites to find projects. Now people are coming to me, and I stay very much entrenched in Facebook as the platform to find work.
So you use social media to market your skills, and
I don't market my skills.
No. Okay.
So Facebook has the social component to it, where you have your news feed and all of that. And then there are groups like even where you and I met, Successful Dropouts. Well, there are thousands, I'm guessing even millions upon millions of groups on Facebook, some of which are geared towards specific topics, whether it's ideology or work.
Mm.
And as it happens, some of those groups where people are like both looking and offering work happen to be focused on editors. So there are several groups that I'm in that either offer just technical support of like, I'm not sure where I should put the comma in this sentence, or like, how do I use these quotes, or what are the rules around this house standard or something. And then there are like affiliate groups where it's people actually posting job offers.
Oh, okay. Okay. And so you had to go to school for some of this, at least to be technically sound in grammar and punctuation and things of that nature, because some of that stuff can get confusing. And I think your school journey is very interesting. I think that's probably one of the more interesting aspects of your life is how Go ahead.
The answer to your question is a yes and no kind of answer. Yes, my school journey is peculiar because I was raised in Switzerland. So if this is a mostly US based audience, that's just already like one big distinction.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in a French speaking city, and I went to public school. So from the first grade through my bachelor's degree, I was speaking almost exclusively French. English was mostly at home.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason why I'm answering yes and no to your question of like the technical side of my job, I didn't go to school for that. I happen to have a bachelor's degree in English literature and history. And I actually had to unlearn a lot of the practices that I had been taught in college around writing to be able to give sound editorial feedback for like online publications, because I worked a little bit for Influensive and the tone isn't the same as an academic paper. Same thing with the clients that I work with now at Foundation for Economic Education and Money Crashers. My education isn't what gave me the opportunity to find the work that I found. In fact, I was reading before I went to school. I was writing phonetically at 3. My mother recently found like just these old exercise papers that I had where I was 3 years old when these were given to me, and I was writing. And I was self-taught. So reading for me, that's like, even in my free time, I'm reading, and yet I'm also paid to read. So I spend a lot of time in front of the written word, just because I like that. And that was before school started, and school kind of killed that in me, to be quite honest, especially college.
Yeah, you went exactly where I wanted you to go. I wanted to kind of lead you into the idea that the notion that you must be formally educated for 8 years or 6 years after high school or whatever it is not accurate, especially in today's age with technology. How do you feel like technology is assists you in doing what you do for a living?
Well, if I didn't have a computer and Wi-Fi, I would probably not have started editing in the first place, because my experience, the starting point of me actually falling into my trade now, was when I joined Praxis, which is very much based on the power of technology and internet and the access that we have to information. I was a Praxis apprentice I did the program between October 2016 and June of 2017. Even then, I didn't do the standard journey in it, but in terms of technology, I need a computer and internet, and then a few clients, and that's all that I need to be able to get my job done. Without it, I would probably be, working in a school still right now.
Right. And wow, I honestly, that was you dealing with going through Praxis. That's actually a shock to me. I was not aware of that. And I've heard of Praxis on the Tom Woods show, and I've considered contacting somebody about Praxis and having them on. So, since you're here, tell us a little bit about Praxis. Tell people how it works, because not everybody's heard of it. I'd say the majority of people haven't heard of it. So let's get into how the nuts and bolts of Praxis works.
So Praxis, loosely put, is an entrepreneurship apprenticeship program. So it very much presents itself, and successfully does so, as an alternative to higher education. So instead of going through college, you go through Praxis, and you pay a lot less money because the program costs, last I checked, it was $14,000. I'm not sure if the rate has changed since then. And it is now a year-long program where you have 6 months of boot camp where you're getting prepped, you're learning about all of the tools that have always been there, but that you might just not have been aware of. And you are starting to interview with potential employers, because Praxis has a whole network of businesses that are looking for young and hungry entry-level employees who might potentially then want to work there full-time in the long run. And these are startups to generally medium-sized businesses. I interviewed with a moving company that focused on college students, and I interviewed with a Montessori education network that was trying to launch a bunch of Montessori, pure Montessori pedagogy schools around the U.S. And other people work for some cloud storage services, and there are SDRs, marketers, creative artists. I'm much more of an educator and an editor, and I could have still found work as a copywriter working for some kind of marketing company, because they have dozens of different business partners. And the goal is to say you don't need college to be an accomplished professional. And in fact, college hinders your learning experience. And especially in the US, again, I went to college in Switzerland, so socialized education meant that I was paying $500 a semester. That's not the case in the US. In the US, you are putting yourself in massive amounts of debt for the sake of a paper that is only there to serve as the starting point for you to be able to enter a career. It says you have enough training to be able to do the job that people are hiring you for. And Praxis says you don't need to do that anymore. Instead, gain the experience, show your curiosity, your story, and everything that you've accomplished up until now are enough experience to say that you are hungry to learn more and want to learn more and can do that yourself, and you don't need to be in school to do that. And you can do that for a job, because the best way that we learn for a very specific reason. Why do I want to do something? Well, because someone needs this of me, or because I want to be able to accomplish this specific task. And so I need XYZ skills to be able to accomplish that task. And Praxis very much uses that to give you the learning experience that you want, and then you build it for yourself.
Yeah. It struck me as a very interesting program. I don't know if I ever really looked at it as for entrepreneurs, which I think is a very interesting way to look at the program. But I looked at it as almost like a trade school for business is kind of the way I looked at it. Like anything you want to do, you can go and you get that hands-on training, that hands-on experience doing it. And within a year, you're way ahead of everybody else.
Yeah. Well, it's basically for anyone who has what they love to call forward tilt, which is these are people who are always thinking about the next project. These are extremely, extremely dynamic individuals. And we have people who are now like some of the top Udemy course creators. Austin Batchelor has hundreds of thousands of people who have bought his course program on Udemy, and he's a few months prior to starting Praxis, he was broke, and now he's extremely well off, to put it lightly. And a lot of other people are like that. I started out Praxis. I had no clue what I wanted to do, and going through the program gave me a lot of clarity on what direction I could potentially take my career and how I could make that happen. And it was just very much about personal empowerment, self-empowerment, because there's a huge focus, like a lot of the people who are in Praxis are libertarian. And that was actually my first introduction to libertarianism. But because of that, they're big on personal power. You as a person are more capable of doing this than any institution trying to impose it on you, because you as the person know yourself best and know how you need to learn stuff and know how you internalize information and where your interests lie, and how potentially from your interests you can gain knowledge about something that's completely unrelated.
Yeah. And I don't know if you've heard of Brian Kaplan's book, The Case Against Education?
I've read several reviews about it, and the biggest criticism is that he doesn't criticize school enough from the people that whose reviews I read, let's say. But well, I'm a huge believer of alternative education. My father is one of the founding parents of the Brooklyn Free School up in New York. It's a democratic free school that's been around for going on like 17 years, I think. No, maybe less, like 15. And I also worked at an Agile Learning Center, which is a self-directed learning space in a community-based environment. And I don't think that school is a healthy model for the majority of the people who attend.
Right. Where I was going with that is you said something earlier about paying a lot of money for a degree, for a piece of paper.
Yes.
And one of the things that I've heard him say, I haven't read the book yet. I plan on reading it eventually. I have a big list of books that I have to get to. And one of the things I've heard him say in interviews and whenever I've seen debates where he's debating people about government-run schools. And one of the things that I found interesting was when he said, well, are you paying for the education or are you paying for the piece of paper that you get at the end of the allotted time, whether it's 4 years or 6 years or whatever? He said, because if you're really interested in the education, you can go to Yale for free. They just will not give you a degree at the end of it. You can go sit in any of these seminars, any of these classes. They're just not going to give you a degree at the end of it. So if the education's what's important, you really don't have to pay for it. But that's not what you pay for. You pay for proof that you went there. You pay for a piece of paper at the end of the whole situation so that you can prove that's where you went. So it's not the knowledge that these facilities are focused on. It's the paperwork.
Qualification.
There you go. There you go. I went blank there for a second. Thank you. And so, I think the Praxis model is going to be a very important model going forward. Now you did mention being dynamic, and this leads me to one of the more interesting parts of your story. You dropped out of a master's program to travel the world. Is that correct?
Yes, back in 2015.
How in the world did you come to that conclusion? Because most people's mind will be blown by the idea of doing something like that.
So how did I come up with that? The how is a big question for me, actually, because it was a buildup of a lot of small things that only now in hindsight do I understand how it created the perfect storm that was February 19th, 2015, when I had my eureka moment of saying, I'm done with school. And that buildup was me physically experiencing what the right decision felt like to me. And it's a bodily experience of like, I am making a decision and this is the right decision for myself. And the first time that I experienced that was when I broke up with my first boyfriend. Well, I don't know, it was a weird situation. And I made the decision of, instead of traveling to Vietnam with him, I would go to New York instead in 2014. And I spent 5 months in New York because, again, I was living in Switzerland at the time. Mm-hmm. And the rightness of my decision over choosing New York over Vietnam was the first experience with that. And everything that I lived in New York was a mind-opening experience where I got to reconnect with my dad. I got to see my little brother grow up because he's 10 years younger than me. I made friends for the first time in New York because I'd left when I was 7, so I didn't have an actual connection to the city. Mm-hmm. And I rebuilt a life in that city that didn't have anything to do with my father. And that was something that I'd really wanted to accomplish. And then going back to Switzerland after New York was a very off-putting experience for me because it didn't feel right. Mm. I saw Geneva when I first landed, and my mother drove me back to her place because I stayed with her for a few months. And I was looking at the city and I was like, this doesn't feel like home anymore. And after having lived there for such a long time, it was very strange. And I still I decided that I would go on a certain path. And so I started the master's program, which was in a different city in Switzerland. Mm-hmm. And I kind of forced myself to feel okay with that, but I was socially isolated. I was very withdrawn. I wasn't very happy. The classes were somewhat interesting, but I didn't have a life. I didn't have anything going on for me except the need to attend these classes. And I started exercising again, but that was it. And I went back to New York for a few weeks after that, and that was January of 2015. And my dad made this comment to me of you're not really living your life, but you just don't get it yet. And I remember feeling really defensive when he made that comment to me, but at the same time, now, years later, it's still with me because it hit home somewhere inside of me. Mm-hmm. And going back to Switzerland, I was again experiencing this physical thing of like, this isn't right. And it's a very physical thing of like, your body just doesn't, I don't know, the vibrations of the universe aren't gelling with my personal vibrations or something, if I want to go all like wooey on that.
Right.
But I started the first week of my second semester of college, and I experienced again like this stuff of like, I'm trying to force something. I was set on the fact that I was going to be in college, that I was going to finish this degree because it was interesting and I would be able to travel once I finished my degree, because with the master's degree in anthropology, I would be doing field work and I would be people watching and I would be getting paid to people watch, and that's what I wanted to do. And then I sat in on a class and the teacher talked for like the professor, spoke in a monotone for 2 straight hours. Completely destroying any curiosity I had about the subject that she was going to teach in that course, which is something about trade, the transatlantic trade during the times where slavery was still a thing,
Oh,
like
okay,
in the 18th century.
Yeah, back in the late 1700s.
Again, yes, and these courses were all in French, so I'm not translating them very well to English right now.
Yeah.
And I started to like fight against the very idea of needing to sit through this course, which was the only one that I was even remotely interested to start out with. And it was like mandatory credits that had nothing to do with my degree, which wasn't supposed to be in anthropology. And I had like this was a transitive year for me because I had to do some extra credits because my bachelor's degree didn't have like field experience and stuff involved in it. And all of a sudden I'm starting to have like a physical reaction against the idea of taking this class. And I'm like, I don't want to be in this class. I don't want to have to do work to get grades that don't mean anything to me, formed by the opinions of professors whose opinions don't matter to me either, to get a paper that I don't actually care about, because the only thing that I want to do is travel.
Mm-hmm.
And it was this buildup of like, I'm doing stuff for people whose opinion doesn't matter to me. And I don't want to do that anymore. And I remember, again, this is like just stamped in my mind of like walking home from the university and calling my mom and starting to cry of like, Mom, you're not going to like what I'm going to tell you. And my mom saying, oh, you're dropping out of school, aren't you? And she guessed before I said it. And my mom isn't usually very astute about that kind of stuff. So it was, I genuinely started crying at that point, and we kind of talked for a few minutes. I can't remember everything else that we said, but it was just, this decision was a long time coming.
Mm-hmm.
And when I talk about feeling the rightness of my decision, I physically felt it of like, this is what I need to do. My body is telling me this is right. And even with a sense of rightness, it doesn't mean that everything is going to perfectly unfold, but it's going to mean that all of the shit that I was dealt later on didn't matter as much to me, because I was doing what was right for myself. And that helped me face all of the hardships that came my way. Cause I moved back in with my mom, and we had a lot of unresolved feelings to kind of work through in cohabitating as two adults. I found a job that paid me very well, so I saved up a lot of money in 3 months to be able to hit the road. Because I took 4 months to prepare to sell everything off and get myself organized to then be able to hit the road. Mm-hmm. I made a decision on where I was going to go next, but during those 4 months, I didn't have the words to explain my decision to anyone, because it wasn't consciously formed yet. It was still very much of a physical response of like, this is what I need to do. I don't have the explanation for why yet, but this is what I need to do. And during that time, that made me very defensive, because my decision was very much going against the grain. And in Switzerland, paper qualifications do trump experience a lot. If you don't have the certification, most of the time they're not going to consider you for the job, even if you have massive amounts of experience in the same field.
Everything's based on your credentials.
Yes.
Yeah.
Switzerland has a lot going for it, but there are components to it that also just I never really gelled with, and that's one of them. And a lot of people were very like overtly judgmental of my decision, and I felt very defensive. And I was very aggressive about that defensiveness. So it's just like, yeah, I dropped out of college. I'm going to travel. Fight me. Fight me. Give me all of your best arguments kind of thing. Because I was trying to rationalize my decision to myself. And I couldn't. I just knew that this is it. This is the right decision.
Mm-hmm.
And on July 12th of 2015, I flew from Geneva to Barcelona. Spent a few days with a friend, with a foster aunt. Then I went to Portugal, and I flew from Portugal to Brazil to Paraguay, where I spent a few weeks with an old high school friend, learned Spanish in that time, and then spent 5 months in Brazil, and then Switzerland, and then the US, where I did meditation retreats in 2016, and then the Bahamas, where I worked in a spiritual community for 3 months, and I baked bread every day for up to 300 people. And then the US again, where I worked with a psychotic woman who verbally abused me and made me question a lot about myself, and not in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went back to Switzerland and got hired for a job in Thailand within a week of applying, and I flew to Thailand. And then I moved to the US and I worked in an alternative school. And then I realized I was tired of always feeling like someone's guest. And I moved to Atlanta, where I was still someone's guest for the first few weeks. And I was able to get myself started professionally and kind of like find work on my own.
Mm-hmm.
And I got settled. And I've been living in Atlanta for a little over a year now. And I'm very happy about that. But it was...
It's just a remarkable story. I can't tell you how remarkable it is to hear your story. And I imagine it's going to be a made-for-TV movie one day. It's just...
I don't know. I'm alone too much in my trips for that to be like a good TV movie.
Well, you can write it and, make physical characters out of the voices in your head. It'll work out.
We'll see. But what's the most interesting in hindsight about everything that I did, because I'm not done traveling. I'm actually a few weeks away from going to spend like 7-ish weeks in Europe, during which I'm going to be spending 10 days just like surrounded by alternative educators in a remote Greek island. The most interesting part of all this during that time was the contrast between who I was when I had lived in Switzerland and who I became as soon as I left school and started making these decisions and listening to the sense of rightness that I felt in my decisions. And what especially going to these meditation retreats in the US in 2016 taught me was that we all have so many voices in our head. And the question became, which voice actually belongs to me, Rebecca? And which voice is one that someone artificially put in there? Because even like my defensiveness about my decision, I wasn't judging myself. It was all of the other people that I listened to in my own mind who were judging me. My mother was judging me and making me feel guilty about the financial decisions, some of the financial decisions I'd made, or even the fact that I was choosing travel over school. How could I do that? And my friends saying, well, what are you going to do with your life? Travel isn't a way to make any money, and you're not going to survive, and you're always going to need to depend on other people. And like the guilt that I was feeling was that kind of voice. And I had to learn how to parse through the voices in my own mind until I heard mine. And I couldn't hear it, but I could feel it, which is what that physical bodily reaction of like, this is the right answer became for me.
Right.
And it taught me to listen to myself.
Well, and it's very easy to see that, at least interpret, I guess would be a better word, to interpret the illness or the feelings that you were feeling while you were in school, the horrible feeling, like something wasn't right. It's very easy to see how somebody would be afraid to do something about that, and how it determines, well, how they can just stay on this path that they feel that they're supposed to stay on, and it turns into depression over the long run because they never did that thing. And in the courage it took for you to say, this isn't right for me. I want to travel, and I am going to design my life around traveling. And you found a way to work remotely, and a career that you can pursue and do it from anywhere in the world, and live exactly the way you want to live, where you want to live, how you want to live. And there's not a lot of people that can do that. And there's not a lot of people that can say that. Because
to clarify in terms of timeline, I didn't do any kind of real remote work for the first year and a half that I was traveling.
Right.
I had saved up just enough, and I was living with $500 a month on average, travel included. Mm-hmm. And I knew that this is what I wanted to do. And even if I was flat broke, I would make it happen. And that's exactly what I did. One of the first thoughts, even like when I was sitting in and I hadn't fully processed my decision in that college class, I was sitting down and starting to calculate, this is how much money I am making passively right now because I had some pension stuff. This is how much money on an hourly basis I can expect to make if I find a job that hires me for this number of hours and I'm living with my mom. And I started like just breaking down all of the math around how much money would I have and how long could I stretch that money out for. And I was very aware of that. And so I had no clue about remote work. I wasn't interested. The whole idea of being a digital nomad at the time felt extremely pretentious to me. And to be honest, it still kind of does, which is why I will probably never use that like appellation for myself. But I wasn't working remotely. I had no clue what I was doing when I first started traveling. I just had enough experience of being on the road because I traveled to the Middle East alone. I traveled to Greece. I'd been traveling on and off alone since I was 20. So it'd already been like 3-4 years by then that I'd been doing it.
Right.
It's just, I later realized that I could make a long-term lifestyle out of this.
Right.
And I wanted to, and then I realized that this was becoming a trend, and we're very fortunate to live in this day and age where remote work is a thing. And so you're not always relying on finding the next job in the next country or the next city, to be able to choose where you want to go. And that gives a remote worker a lot more freedom in the places where they end up. It also restricts them in the sense that they need internet to be able to do their work, but it's still pretty damn free in the end.
Yeah. Well, and I think what I was trying to say was what you determined was the traveling is what I have to have. This is what I have to do.
Yes.
You know, and so every other aspect of my life is going to have to operate around this. And people are afraid to do things like that. They're afraid to step out of the box and do things their own way. And that's one thing I always hope that I portray to my kids, at least, am able to verbalize properly, that they do and follow whatever compulsion they have, but they have to understand, and this is one thing I noticed about your story, they have to understand these decisions are not made willy-nilly. You did not just turn around and quit school. You made plans and you thought about this and you went through this. And that process is very important, that you don't just go jump off the cliff, that you actually make the right preparations. And,
to some extent. Well, to some extent, I would say.
You obviously can't plan for everything because you're not going to see everything, but you do have to put some thought into it and not just throw caution to the wind. Would you agree with that?
Yes and no.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes and no, because I did literally just walk away from college. That day that I made the decision was the last day that I set foot in a university building as a student. But the thing is that even as I was walking away knowing that I'm not going to be back in this school ever again, I didn't bail on the people who might have been counting on me. I took responsibility for the outcome of my decision. And that's where I think it's really important to be aware. It's that anything you do will have a consequence, and it can be great consequence. It can have amazing benefits for you, but it can also be a really crap one where you're going to suffer. You're going to have to say things and do things that you don't like. You're going to have to put yourself in situations that are uncomfortable for you. But because you made a certain decision, this is the outcome, and you got to live with it in a sense. And this is one of the most important lessons that I've learned from traveling, from dropping out of school, from even being a freelancer, is that there is no middle person between me and whatever I'm doing. And so I am held fully accountable for anything that I end up choosing to do, because it is completely of my own free will that I put myself in that situation.
Right.
I worked in an ashram for 3 months. They expected me to put in 6 to 12-hour work a day in exchange for the housing that they offered for me and the free yoga lessons that I could take when my schedule didn't clash. And I lived in a tent for 3 months, and I was up every morning between 3 and 5 o'clock in the morning to get that bread baked for everyone during that day. And I was held accountable for that because I had made the decision of I'm committing to this and I'm going to follow through on my commitment. Of I'm dropping out of school. I need to message all of the friends who have ongoing projects with me and tell them this is what's going on. Tell me, how can I help you? If you want me to continue doing research, I will keep doing it, even if I'm not going to get a grade for it, because I don't want you to suffer from my decision. I need money. I'm not going to go to my mom and say, Mom, I dropped out of school. I know you don't like it, but give me $10,000 so that I can travel now. Instead, it's like, well, I need money. I need to travel. I need a job. I need to be able to pay my way. What is my mother willing to support me with? Well, she was willing to support me by offering me a room in her home, rent free. She bought a lot of the food, so half the time I wasn't buying any of the food, and I had that freedom, and I could set myself up and I could put more money towards my savings much faster that way. And it's all of these things of there's always some kind of consequence to any decision you make, and you are the person who is going to deal with the consequence. And if it means that your decision hurt other people, then you got to go apologize and take ownership over having hurt other people. And just personal responsibility is all of a sudden like right there in your face, and you can't get away from it. Yeah.
I can't get over the courage it took to do what you did. Did anything in your life as a child, like younger in your life, did anything prepare you to make decisions like that? Or was this something that you were just terrified and you're like, but I have to do it?
Both.
Okay.
Yes to both of those questions. I was completely terrified by my decision, even as I knew that this is what I needed to do. As I first mentioned, it was really a slow buildup of experiences over the past few years that brought me to my decision. And even now, like I'm helping a friend kind of process her decision that she's a physicist for corporate America, and she isn't very happy in her job for a bunch of reasons. And it's a slow buildup of, I don't like the work that I'm doing. And this is not what I want to do. And so she hasn't hit that breaking point yet, which was that professor speaking in a monotone for 2 straight hours. That was my breaking point.
Yeah.
But there was a build up for me to reach my breaking point. For my friend, she hasn't reached it, and she's going to get there. Something at some point is going to be the final straw to break the camel's back, and she's going to say, fuck this, I'm out. But that said, I was also just all of my travel experiences very much kind of resonate with the child that I always was. My mom and my dad both have countless stories of losing me because I decided to go and hang out with a different family for a few hours. My mom said that when I was a toddler, when we would go to the restaurant, and my mom knew that within 10 minutes of us sitting down, I would be probably chatting with a different family and eating dinner with them instead. If the family was willing to welcome me and if they weren't weirded out by it and would bring me back to my mom. And my dad tells me the story, my family's Jewish, and we went to an Orthodox wedding where men and women were separated, and he found me, both my parents lost me for an hour, and they found me on the men's side dancing in my little red dress and my blonde hair with all of the men in their long black coats and big hats and big beards and stuff. And they were all holding my hands and singing and dancing with me. Mm-hmm. That was the kid I was. And so that's also why travel has always felt very right to me, because I'm much more spontaneous, and a different side of Rebecca comes out, a much more extroverted side than who I am when I tend to be settled somewhere. Mm-hmm. Because I'm forced to deal with a set of circumstances that are unfamiliar to me. And I'm the kind of person that's oh, fun kind of thing when that happens. I've jokingly said that my comfort zone is it's outside of everyone else's, and everyone else's is exactly what is completely unfamiliar and frightening to me.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any advice for younger listeners that are inspired by your story?
I would say go for it. Honestly, just if there's something that you really want to accomplish, then listen to that desire inside of you, because that's what's going to guide you in making a set of decisions that are going to both teach you something in the good and the bad, and help you grow into the kind of person that you want to be. And all of a sudden, whether you're doing it intentionally or not, you're becoming exactly the kind of person that you like the most. Yeah. And I have never been more content and fulfilled than I am right now. And that feeling is what is guiding me in all of my decisions here and now, because I'm aware of what feels right for me. And it's because I'm trusting myself to do that.
And that's something that's a perfect word to use. You have to trust yourself to work your way through these obstacles that are going to come your way. Because following a traditional path carved out, by previous generations does not rid life of obstacles. It's just a lot of those obstacles you're able to see coming from ahead. But when you're carving your own path your way, there's obstacles that maybe you didn't even see as a potential. Can you tell us about some of those things that you had to deal with that maybe you didn't expect to have to deal with?
So I never knew until I was in that situation how anxious I get if I don't know how I'm going to make my next dollar. That was one of the most stressful experiences I had, because money problems make me anxious. I don't know how other people deal with them, and I will not speak to that, but that was my take on it. And I realized that I need to be focused on, at some point I needed to focus on my career, because not having money made me very anxious. And that, even just that anxiety means that I don't really fit in with the typical hippy dippy nomads that I would meet. And I didn't really fit in with the digital nomads. And all of a sudden it's where is my place in the world kind of question. And that was a big moment for me, a big turning point that I continue to process after moving and settling down in Atlanta, of where I fit only matters to me, and I will find that place and I will create it myself from the ground up. But to have that realization while I was experiencing all of that fear was paralyzing and debilitating. And it was very hard to then like create that forward momentum, that forward tilt again within myself.
And so what did you do to overcome the anxiety you feel when you don't know when your next dollar is coming from? How did you create that sense of security in your life?
Meditation was a great support, because meditation doesn't remove your problems. It just allows you to step back from the emotions that you attach to those problems. Mm-hmm. And I also very actively sought out any kind of work that I could do, which is how I found myself working in Thailand for a small calisthenics company that was entirely remote, learning the ins and outs of marketing. And it was also just trusting myself that I am a very curious person. I like to learn stuff. I like to do stuff. I have learned how to promote myself to potential employers, and I can find work. And it's not necessarily work that I like, but if it's work that's paying me my next dollar, then I'm going to be okay with that for now until I am a little bit less freaked out, and I can then focus on bigger projects that will actually be what the kind of stuff that I want to do that will take me into the place where I want to be next.
Do you look at work as this just popped into my head whenever you were talking. Do you look at work as a ends justify the means type deal? So it's like, I don't like to work, but I like what I'm going to get whenever I go travel, and I have to work to be able to go travel. Is that kind of how you look at work?
Not now, not anymore.
Okay.
But for a while, yes. For a while I was traveling, because I wasn't focused on a career to travel. I was just saying, I want to travel. I'm going to make it work. I'm just kind of like, I'm going to make it work. I'm going to force the square peg in the round circle. Or but when you're not clear on what you want to do, and I had no clarity career-wise. I had no focus on career while I was traveling. I didn't know what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. I just knew that I liked kids. And then I'm an insanely curious person, and those two things kind of guided me into the opportunities that I found. And because I was also like placed in a kind of different mindset, I was very social, and so I'm very open about saying, hey, I need work. I don't know what I'm going to do next. Do you have work for me? And then some other people kind of like joke about like, hey, I should hire you. Or something like, you're so good at that, I should hire you for this. And I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? And I was a bit of I am a shameless opportunist in terms of someone has something to offer that I might be interested in. I have absolutely nothing to lose in asking if I can potentially get it. Right. Hey, you're getting rid of your bed. I need a bed. Can I get your bed from you? And if they say no, well, they said no, and that's life. And I learned how to deal with rejection a lot better because of this, but it's like, I'm not afraid to ask. And work was a means to an end for a while. Mm-hmm. And now work is my focus, because it is still a bit of a means to an end, but it's also an experience in itself. I love editing. Mm-hmm. I am reading massive amounts of content. I am learning all kinds of new things. I had no clue about the ins and outs of HTML until I started formatting ebooks. And I have no idea how to write ghost books, and yet I just finished writing my first book project for a new client. And I'm learning how I fit into things, and all of that is an experience in itself that I absolutely adore. And even when it was a means to an end, I was baking bread. I learned dozens of bread recipes that I can still now reproduce pretty easily in my own oven. And that's awesome. Mm-hmm. And every job that I've had, even if I wasn't originally interested in it, it taught me something. I've been working since I was 11, so I can't tell you how many jobs I've held, but dozens. I've worked in dozens of different places, and everything taught me something. It said, I like this, I don't like this, and it helps me like kind of parse through everything that I know and that I've done to start painting the picture of the kind of life I like for myself and the kind of work I like for myself and the kinds of people I like to hang out with and the kind of person I am in certain environments and what environments feel like they're the healthiest for me. And it was a getting to learn who Rebecca is kind of experience, and the jobs as a means to an end taught me that.
Well, you heard it here, folks. Switzerland has no child labor laws. So.
That's not true. I was just, again, I'm an opportunist. Someone needs a babysitter. I'm 11 years old. I like kids. Pay me money. You're paying me less than other people because I'm younger, and you still think that I'm responsible enough, so you'll pay me 50 francs and I'll be happy.
Yeah. I'm just messing around. Oh, wow. There's so much there to unpack. How did you come across? How did you rekindle your love of reading and editing and all these things after college? Because one thing I was talking to a buddy of mine, well, actually my interview I did a few days ago with Brad Carl, and he was talking about how he really lost his desire to write and read, and whenever it became a chore in college. How did you rekindle that, or did you ever lose it?
I resonate with what your friend said, because I had a very similar experience in college, especially because my degree was in English literature. Mm-hmm. English literature and history. So for both of those subjects, I was like, my nose was stuck in the books or in front of a computer screen doing research and reading content. And with English lit, while I was analyzing and doing a lot of like literary critical analysis of some books that I absolutely adored. And sometimes I loved even just analyzing. But as time wore on, I got tired and resentful of the stuff that I was doing, and I dragged my feet. And the only reason why I even finished my degree was because my mom was there behind me saying, you gotta do it, and making me feel really guilty about it. She and I have talked about this. This is not news to her if she ever ends up listening to this. But it was not completely, it didn't feel like it was of my own free will that I was doing this degree in the end. I rekindled my love, actually thanks to Praxis. Well, in part, the reading. I started reading dirty romance novels while I was still in college, and I realized that I was more interested in reading those novels than reading the literature that I was assigned in class.
Right.
And I happen to just be completely fascinated with all things pop culture. I can analyze the shit out of Jerry Springer for you, and same thing with the Real Housewives and the Bad Girls Club and a few other like reality shows, because they're fascinating to me. Like, I am intellectually intrigued by why these shows are so popular, and then I got caught up in the storyline. Same thing goes for romance novels. And all of a sudden I was like getting that like my curiosity was piqued again, in a sense, when I started reading those books, because I was sitting down and I was realizing that so many authors who make it to the New York Times bestsellers list are shit. Mm. I will say this again. Most of the authors who are on the New York Times bestsellers list for romance novels are not good writers. Their plot lines are terrible. The narratives suck. The characters are completely superficial and pathetic and unrealistic. And I do not like the tropes of the alpha male that most of these books represent. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden I was like intrigued by that. I was like, this is a thing. And so I started reading more. And I think within the first year of, like, I started reading, it was like August of 2014. So a month after I got back from New York. And I started with 50 Shades of Grey. And I probably read like over 100 or 200, probably over 200 books in the first year alone.
Oh, wow.
And then in 2016, I started Praxis. And one of the challenges that is still a challenge now, because the program format that I had was different than what it's become since then. There's a blogging challenge where every day for 30 days you are challenged. And again, you're the only one holding yourself accountable to that, to write and to post a blog post. And I'd never done that before. And all of a sudden I was writing every single day, and I was starting to tell these stories, and I was like, I like this. This feels good. And there was part of that challenge was peer-to-peer editing because other participants were following the same schedule as I was. And so other people needed their articles edited, and I was giving feedback, and they really liked the feedback that they gave me, and I liked getting the editorial feedback, and I was like, I like doing this. And inside of the Praxis network, I posted a message of like, hey, I'm curious about this. If any other people know where I can find this kind of work, tell me. And then one of the founders, TK Coleman, sends me a message saying, Rebecca, ask for money, charge for your editing stuff, like set prices, even if it doesn't actually pay you any real money, make it symbolic so that you can start understanding that you can live off of this.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I did that. I posted a message. I can probably find it somewhere if ever, of like, hey, I want to do this. This is what I can offer you. Because again, they talk about in Praxis a lot about value propositions. What value am I providing you in making this offer? What do I have to offer for you, and what are then you going to give me back in exchange for that? Because it's all about trade and free markets and yada, yada, yada. And so I'm offering editing stuff, and all of a sudden I had my first editing client ever who gave me, he would interview clients and then send me the audio transcript of his interview and ask me to turn that into a book. And I loved it.
Yeah.
It was so interesting. It was so interesting to me. And all of a sudden I was like, I really like doing this. And I didn't immediately follow through on that interest because I was, again, I kind of like, I had set a plan in my own mind and I was kind of stubborn about it. Of like, I'm going to work with kids. I'm going to work with in education. This is what I'm going to do. Editing is going to be a side thing. I might be able to make a few $100 off of it every month. And I was like, for most of the program, I was still in that mindset. And it was when I came to Atlanta that a friend on Facebook said, I need an editor. And I was like, hey, here are my rates. And all of a sudden you had a lot of work for me. And then someone else reaches out to me like, hey, can we give you a test and then hire you? And I'm like, yes. and then I'm making as much as I am as a preschool teacher because that's the job that I first held when I got here.
Yeah.
And then I realized I can actually like make a living off of this. I can make a real living off of this.
Right.
And that's how it like turned into an actual job for me.
Oh, that's really interesting. That's really interesting. I'm curious because I write creatively and most of it, I haven't published most of it, which I'm in the process of getting to a point where I can get an editor and get some of this stuff out there, but it's gonna take a little bit of time. Because obviously it takes a little bit of money. As I say that, but there's something really admirable about the way you approach things, and you see potential where there's seemingly none. And it took me. I mean, I'm almost 39 years old, and I've never had that ability to see potential in projects the way you do. If I did, I'd probably be in a lot different place than I am today. So it's a rare quality. How would you explain to someone who's looking to free themselves in some way, shape, or form, whether it's they want to be able to travel or they want to work for themselves, but they're afraid to take that jump? How do they find these options and these opportunities that are out there? Is it because some of them obviously just fell in your lap, but it seems like there's a skill to recognizing what's really what's a real option and what's just a scam or a fly-by-night scheme.
So experiences will build enough that instead of needing to spend hours looking at things, you can just stare at it and see with the snap of a finger what it is in a sense. Mm-hmm. So because And this is something that we are not given enough opportunity to learn growing up with traditional systems, because they remove any of those opportunities for experience by dictating right from wrong for you. Mm-hmm. And I was, and that's where the child that I was comes into play, where I was so insanely curious and dynamic and proactive, just like, I want to go have dinner with that family, I'm going to go do it, and my parents can't really do anything about it, was very much a thing for me. And that taught me who likes what and potentially why. And it teaches me also, like, how can I show up to this social environment and either completely fit in or make it, or intentionally kind of disrupt how it's working. And it's very much a buildup of experiences where I read this thing about, like, listening to your gut or listening to your instincts is actually this accumulation of experiences that have now become completely internalized to the point where you can look at something and just understand what it is and how it stands for, because your prior experiences have built that up for you.
Right.
So if you want to make a decision about something, then learn what the right decision feels like for you, which is why I like to talk about this physical bodily experience of rightness. Because I might have had a ton of life experience prior to that to teach me a lot of things, but that's not one of the things that I had learned. That I only learned in my early 20s, and I'm grateful, because apparently it's still much sooner than a lot of people that I've talked to. But it's very much, you gotta try and you gotta fail. And it's really important to be able to understand what in your attempt brought you to failure, and then what have I learned from this failure, and what has this failure brought to me, in a sense? What value has this failure created in my life? Because even in failure, there's value and there's something to be gained. And so that's how I ended up living for 5 weeks with a completely crazy spinster lady who was, I do not use spinster lightly, because I'm big on self-empowerment, and you do you, and if you want to be alone for the rest of your life, that's your choice. Mm-hmm. But this woman was a very unhappy individual who had a very clear set of ideas, and it didn't gel with me. And yet I still lived with her for 5 weeks, and that was a big mistake. But I learned from it. I learned what it looks like when I am emotionally shut down. I learned why and how I shut down emotionally, and what triggers that. And I learned how much tolerance I have, and how I respond to certain situations of, like, verbal abuse. Well, I go quiet and I process things quietly in my corner, and that's my mechanism. And this is what my mechanism looks like. How does it serve me? How does it do me a disservice? And all of a sudden I'm learning about myself, but I'm taking the time to understand who Rebecca is in all of these different situations. And learning that, I start to paint, even in my mind's eye, a very clear picture of the person that I truly am. And all of a sudden I have an unfiltered perception of myself.
Yeah.
And that brings me a level of self-understanding that is absolutely necessary if I want to be able to be responsible for all of my own decisions and stop relying on some entity or institution to tell me right from wrong. But I had to learn that, because I was still even if it wasn't the American system, I was still in an institutionalized system in Switzerland, and I needed to get away from that to be able to learn about myself.
Mm-hmm. Do you do any volunteer work with children? I know you've mentioned several times that you really love working with kids. Do you still work with kids?
Right now, not so much, actually. I'm very focused on career, but my going to Switzerland, for example, is going to just be the chance for me to spend time with my, by then, 9-month-old niece, who I've only seen when she was a few weeks old. And I like spending time around kids. I don't need to be in a learning environment to make that happen. But I am planning, probably September, October, now that I'm better established and organized professionally, to take some time and spend a day or two a week at an alternative school here in Atlanta, just to hang out with the kids and talk with them and just like let them see them play and whatnot. And some friends are also like starting to ask me to babysit.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure if I should look for you on any commercials for just a cup of coffee a day, so I was just curious. I didn't know if when you traveled you spent time with children or anything like that. I was just curious.
I did, but it wasn't intentionally planned, and I generally avoid situations where I am the foreigner bringing in help, because I did that once when I was 17, and that did not sit right with me. That didn't feel like a good decision physically again.
Yeah.
Because I'm not the white savior. I'm just Rebecca.
Right. Okay, well, we've been going at this about an hour now, a little bit over, and I want to give you an opportunity for any closing thoughts and to plug anything, anywhere somebody might follow you or find you if they want to use your services, if you have a website or anything. If you could just wrap us up, and then I'll close this out and we'll get off of here.
If you want to accomplish anything in your life, be curious. Lead with curiosity and playfulness, and I promise you that will teach you so much about yourself and allow you to accomplish a lot more than you think you can. And if you want to reach out to me, well, you can find me on Facebook. Please feel free to shoot me a message about where you found me and happily add me. And otherwise, you can find me on medium.com at Rebecca Zeines, where all of my most recent writing is. And otherwise, send me an email, RebeccaZeines@gmail.com.
And that's Zeines, Zeines?
Yes.
Okay. Just to clarify, so people that do want to reach out to you can find you. It's Rebecca.
Yeah, you can Google me.
Okay, go ahead.
Google me, Rebecca, Rebecca. And my last name is Zeines, Zeines. If you search for me on Google, you should find me without any difficulty, because I'm the only Rebecca Zeines out there.
You know you've made it when you can be found on Google. So. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. That was Stranger Encounters with Rebecca Zeines. I'm Tommy Salmons.
Sinking, tearing deeper than my skin. Faded eyes can't see true evil within me. Broken mirror of my life cuts my soul.